Okay, I'm gonna get started here. I know there's some people probably still coming in. Let me get my other window here. Okay. All right, thanks for coming in, everybody. I'm back again for a training on schedules. This is part 3, so what I would call kind of the last of the series here. For those that don't know me, my name is Joel Thomas. I work with QRC and help put together this training today. So today we'll be going through kind of the end of project schedule, delay analysis, getting into kind of liquidated damages, and looking at kind of basically fast forwarding to the end of a schedule and trying to figure out how do these marbles all stack up, and how do we close this project out. As always, starting with the HDOT core values. So a little bit of review here, but accountability, community, and teamwork are kind of the 3 that we've highlighted regarding schedules. Accountability, the schedules provide a framework for tracking completion based on contract time and budget. Community engagement, schedules keep the public informed and manage expectations. And then teamwork, there's a shared leadership involving schedule management. So today's training outline, we are looking at kind of a refresher with the dashboard and milestones. We'll be taking a look at the specifications regarding schedules as they relate to delays, liquidated damages. We'll be taking a look at the as-built schedule, which just means the final, at the end of your project schedule, everything that happened. Looking into delay analysis, and then liquidated damages assessment. So kind of going through and looking through some examples of how to kind of assess those LDs at the end of a project. And then finally, the end of project, it's really just like a time adjustment change order if you need one, and how do those LDs play in and all of that. So we'll be getting into all those things. The main things I would hope you take away from this training: determining the merit on delay claims. Really, it's not necessarily just determining merit, but it's kind of how you analyze those delays, understanding them, and then determining merit. Second bullet, concurrent delay. So I think a lot of you are probably more or less familiar with concurrent delay, but we'll be kind of looking at some more examples of how this looks, how to try to determine when there's concurrent delays, and using ACC as a tool to help you find that. Liquidated damages, understanding the difference between liquidated damages in, say, a punch list or closeout section of your schedule, because the spec is a little bit different. And then finally, just that final time adjustment change order. And as I mentioned, it's sort of just taking all the marbles and trying to figure out how they stack up. I always like to put a why in my trainings or presentations. So the why behind all of this is, a key role we play on projects regarding schedule is time management. Successful schedule tracking helps minimize and mitigate delays. Delay equals money for the contractors, or cost for contractors, HDOT, or both usually. A deeper understanding of delay ownership is critical, and particularly at the end of a project. little bit of review. I did use this slide the last time we met, but just a reminder, we do need to make sure we are enforcing these milestones. So and exactly as they read here, but notice to proceed, start work, pre-final inspection, final inspection, contractual completion, and substantial completion. These should all be milestone activities on your schedules. And that would be, added by the contractor into their raw P6 or Microsoft Projects files for the schedules. Again, just another review slide on those milestones, but today we will be focusing on these final 4 here to get a little bit more into it. The pre-final inspection. So with the pre-final inspection milestone, just adding note that we like to see the pre-final inspection, and then after that milestone would be a period of time that's allotted for punch list items. I like to see at least 5 or 10 working days in there as a good target, or basically two weeks. A lot of schedules I've seen do not have this period, but it is kind of important because technically the contract, all the work has to be done by your substantial completion date. So giving your schedule, allowing this extra time for this punch list work is pretty critical. As we know, we have to do, the pre-final inspection and then follow it up with a punch list set of items. Added in here that per HSS 10813B, there is a requirement that the contractor submit notification that they're ready. It's essentially them writing a letter saying that they're ready for substantial completion. They feel that they are substantially complete. So we are just harping on that requirement. It's kind of plays a key role in when we mark those milestones completed. So once that letter comes through and we're ready to do our pre-final inspection, we do need the letter that kind of goes along with it. And then just adding note here that the contractor is charged 20% of LDs if outside of the contract time. What this basically means is once let's say your pre-final inspection notice comes through and you're after your contractual completion date, so you're kind of already in a delay situation, then if the contractor is still on the hook to complete all this punch list, per spec, we actually charge 20% of the LDs. And this is straight out of the spec. That final inspection milestone. So with this one, it's basically kind of the bookend, right? So they do the pre-final, we do all the punch list stuff, and then that final inspection comes where we would be essentially granting substantial completion. Just wanted to add this clarification. So it says within 10 days of notification from the contractor that punch list is complete. What this is basically saying is that once let's say we get to final inspection, they complete all their punch list, we would then have a 10-day window. We, being HDOT, has a 10-day window where we can grant substantial completion as long as we agree that all the punch list is completed. In that window of time, we don't accumulate any LDs because it's kind of just becomes a paperwork situation at the end, right? All physical work and punch list work has been completed. So just adding that in, that's sort of how that piece works. The contractual completion date, again, this one is just a date that signifies the date of obligation required per the contract. So whatever the contract required the contract to be completed by, that's what this milestone is. This milestone adjusts with anytime you execute a time extension change order. And that's kind of how that works. Substantial completion, as we all know, is just the final end all last activity that gets marked completed on your schedule. And you should be getting that at the end of your project. It should be the last schedule submittal that you get, which says we are fully completed with this project, and all the activities are shown as being completed. Just wanted to show an example again of that dashboard we talked about a few times now. So up at the top here, you can see what we're working on would be those milestones I mentioned that will kind of be up in this upper right corner. A list of all the projects are here, and then kind of adding note that not all projects have those milestones listed. Now, I think some of these projects might be completed already, and that's fine. But for the ones that are in active construction, we do want to see all these milestones. And then at the bottom here, I was just showing that we are going to be showing a metric where H.dot upper management would be able to see when projects are running over. So it is critical that we have these milestones added. One more example of this, I took the projects out. I'm not trying to put anyone on blast here, but you can see that there's just a lot of dates that are missing on currently. So in other words, when it's missing, it just means the milestone has not been added on your schedules. So just harping on the importance of getting your milestones all dialed up and in the system. Now I'm going to do a quick walk through the standard specs as they apply to schedules. So this first one here is HSS 10805B, and this is the one that I mentioned where the contractor, this is the notice of delay. So when contractors experience something on site or otherwise that is causing a delay to the critical path on the project, they have to serve a written notice to the engineer not more than 5 working days after the occurrence. This means that this is a critical piece, right? This isn't an email. This is a letter that allows us, as on the owner side, it's important for us to be able to manage the delay. If we're going to be hit later for ownership of this delay, how can we manage it if we don't even realize that the delay is pushing the end date of our project? So it is up to the contractor to provide these notifications. I usually discuss this in our weekly meetings just as a reminder to the contractors. Anytime that you're experiencing something that is causing a delay, I want to know about it immediately so that I can do what I can to elevate and push on my side to get us out of that delay. So that's what kind of the importance of this spec right here. And then a little bit further into that, the contractor must show how the critical path will be affected. So this is just another part of that same notification. They should be providing something, language that at least explains how our critical path for the project is being pushed, including like a schedule, kind of like a snippet from the schedule or something that shows us what's going on. And then that way we can kind of understand and agree with or not that the critical path is being affected. HSS 10808B. So this is the liquidated damages during the punch list period. I just wanted to highlight it, that 20% of the LD amount that I had kind of gone over previously. This part is it's just straight out of the specs. So it's something that we're going to take a harder look at in a minute. Wanted to add this in because I've seen this a few times, but there's compensation during the rain days. So compensation during rain days is not allowed. So it would mean, how I know we're tracking through the weekly statement of working days, rain days, and all that. This basically tells us, we would grant the time, but not the compensation. And compensation I'm talking about would be, time-related overhead from the contractor. So time-related overhead, for those of you that don't know, is basically it's all of their overhead expenses, their office expenses, their that they can put in that Eichley's formula. There's different things that go into that, but it's not necessarily related to the project itself. So it's kind of becomes like more of a just an overhead expense to the contractor that now they're being, because they're going to be on the project for this many more days at the end of the project, they're charging us for kind of those expenses. And if you guys haven't seen this come through before, that shows it's kind of becoming more and more, um, I would say, kind of more and more happening, I guess, for lack of a better word. HSS 10813A. So the contractor submits notice of substantial completion. And this was just what I mentioned before, where the contractor is required to let us know that they're ready for that pre-final inspection. This is straight out of the specs. So now I'm actually going to move it over to kind of ACC and my PDF for a second here. So again, I'm kind of using that project that I created, my fake project, the same one I used before. What I did was I progressed that schedule all the way to the end, and then kind of had a couple of delay periods in that schedule that I'm going to go through. In most cases, or I shouldn't say in most cases, in a lot of cases, when we get to the end of a schedule or end of a project, maybe we haven't sorted out the delays. A lot of times during construction, it's like you're just trying to kind of move forward, get the work completed and move on. And hey, we'll handle the time part later. And that's sort of what I was trying to show here, was that we got to the end of the project. We hadn't granted any time extensions, but now we have to sort of figure it all out. So in this case, the contractor, I'm just going to kind of walk through what this looks like, because I'm sure you guys have seen something similar. They've written us a letter saying that they're requesting an additional 70 calendar days be added to the contract, and $455,000 for the extended overhead attributable to that delay. So this is not related to any work that was required. This is actually just the time-related overhead that was associated with this 70 days. And it looks like they've split it into 4 kind of delay periods here. They've included attachments. Looks like different justifications for each of those delays, final weekly statement of working days, and then a time-related overhead calculation. I'm going to flip this over to my version of this that has comments, just so I can kind of go through it and explain a little bit more. So again, we're submitting this TIA with extended overhead request. When you kind of do the math on the amount they're asking for, I came up with, 70 calendar day time extension, $6,500 in overhead per calendar day is the math. And that came out to the 455. So that's what they're asking for. Delay number 1, this period here, they were asking for a 14 calendar day delay. Delay 2 was a 34 calendar day. Delay 3 was a 19 calendar day. And then the 4th delay period was the rain days, where they had 3 calendar days. Now, when I counted all 4 of these up, I came up with 70. So in other words, that tells me that they're asking for compensation for all of this, including the rain days. So I already know, per that spec I went through earlier, that we're going to have to take these 3 calendar days out at a minimum. I already see that. That's the first thing I noticed. And what we would need to do is kind of go through, and the purpose of what I'm going to go through today is we're going to go through and try to do an analysis on all of these delay periods, determine if there was any concurrent delays, and that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to be walking through here down below. So this first exhibit was for delay 1. It looks like it's a letter that they had written on October 2nd, 2025, which I can just tell you was the day that that delay started. So they meet the spec of 10805B where they provided notification at the time of the delay. It was within that 5-day window, so that part of it checks out. It looks like this letter also included kind of a little bit of verbiage that explains what the delay was. It says the delay will impact the material procurement of steel needed to construct PCC in both phases 1 and 2, which we know was on the critical path. So it's kind of lining up to, that we would agree this did push the substantial completion out. They also included, per spec 10805B1, a kind of a little bit more of a analysis showing how this delay is pushing on my critical path. And I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see there's my delay. It was added on October 2nd, and it looks like it's pushing out my critical. So this, to me, this would be, as long as we're in agreement that that was extra work or whatever, we've done that merit check, then from a schedule standpoint, I would agree that this delay pushed the critical path for the project. So I'm just kind of trying to piece this thing together. And then my second delay letter also met, it was written to us within the 5-day time period. So I would say this also met the specs, and it's kind of more the same. So both of those delay periods 1 and 2, I've determined that from a schedule standpoint, I would agree those did push the critical path, and the notifications met the specs. So I would grant merit to that. This third one, it was a punch list delay notification. So this letter that they're including as their justification was actually the letter where they were requesting substantial completion. And I've seen this before. That's why I wanted to use it as an example. But the contractor basically wrote a letter saying, hey, we're ready for substantial completion. We're done. And they're trying to use this because they know per spec they need a letter that signified the delay. But however, there's nothing in this letter about delay. So I was just adding note that this letter met the spec of 10813A, but it does not meet or support the delay notification requirements in 10805. So just adding that comment. And then you'll see this too, where, you get like a printout of a PDF email. Now, I know, we need to kind of do a deeper look at some of this stuff, but just for the purposes of the training, I'm just adding, an email does not count as an official notification for a delay per spec, right? It has to be a letter written to HDOT. It cannot be just an email. So for the purposes of this training, I am going to reject merit on this, saying that they did not meet the spec. And, you'll get like a kind of gobbledygook of, here's the punch list, and the contractor disagrees that this shouldn't be closed. And we've all seen this before, but they're claiming that the delay at the end of the project was due to all of this. And then I just added this in too, because I've seen this a bunch where they're trying to say, hey, our notification was noted on our weekly statement of working days, where here they had this comment added where they were reserving the right to time adjustment due to delays. They highlighted it, and they're just saying, yeah, like everyone knew that we were in delay. And I'm just showing you that, it's kind of like one or the other. And in this case, they didn't meet that spec.
Hey, Joel.
Hey.
Andy had a question, which I thought was good, and then I'm putting some other things in the chat. For the rain delays, he's asking if the contractor should be submitting a rain delay for each of those events notification.
No. So for the rain days, that's being tracked through the weekly statement of working days, and it's usually
Mhm.
just added into the schedule. So we're all kind of in agreement with the contractor on the rain days, but
So no
no,
notification for rain days.
correct, yeah, we don't need notification for rain days, but they're if they're claiming compensable delay for rain days, that's where we would usually just deny merit because it's in the spec that we don't grant compensable delay for rain events or acts of God or whatever they call it.
There's also pursuit of permits is like that as well. That they
Yeah.
they get time but no compensation. Um, so and Andy, hopefully that answers your question. If anybody else has questions, I did drop the substantial completion flow chart in the chat because it is, Joel brought up the reduced LD amount, and it is quite a process if and when you're actually following the specs as
Hmm.
to, again, contractor has to request substantial completion, so they need to understand that's part of their responsibility, and the LDs really don't end until all work is complete and it meets the definition of substantial completion. So there's references and all of the spec requirements for that substantial completion, which I'm just bringing it up because you brought up the reduced LD amount.
Hmm.
And one of the other things, I just put it in the chat because I know I've had conversations with the various folks on what TRO is. And so if you don't go into this, maybe we will, but escalation and things are a little bit different. Suspension, I know we were talking about it, and Highway K requested maybe a little more in-depth training on suspension. So this is a lead up to that. And yeah, I think that's it.
Agreed. Yeah. And I didn't get into the escalation in this training, but that is another part of it. I think there'll probably, like Kai just said, we'll have a training that goes a little bit deeper into time related overhead and escalation and all that.
And probably
I
ice formula and that kind of stuff. Yes.
Yes.
I just want to add to. I think it gets a little bit more complicated with like calendar day contracts and rain
Yeah.
because we're not
Hmm.
tracking them like a regular working day contract. So if contractors are claiming rain, which I think technically they're not supposed to claim it on calendar day, but if they can show, I think that it's abnormal, out of the norm for a given month or time period, then I think, yeah, you got to go down that whole
Yeah.
assessment,
That
right?
that's
That's a good
actually a
point.
good point because
Yeah.
I think there's a differing approach to calendar day versus working day across the districts. So that would also be a nice little training to expand on how that's being done and to get consistency and agreement on how that should be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, just wanted to add that in there.
Nope, that's a good point.
Good point,
Okay,
Randall.
go ahead.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of the last piece of the puzzle here is looking at that overhead rate. And for the time related overhead, it's usually just going to be kind of, a bunch of data that helps justify whatever number they've come up with. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to say, yes, this was good. And we did come up with $6,500 per calendar day. And, you'll see kind of spreadsheets and stuff like this that just kind of goes heavier into the details of it all. But so now what I do is I have all this information. What I want to do now is kind of take a look to try to find those concurrent delays, and wanted to show you how I figured out a way to sort of do this in ACC, which is fairly helpful. So I took my last project schedule and I already updated it into here, I'm in my schedule module in ACC, right? So I'm going to click into this. What I'm
Joel,
going to do, yeah.
hey, sorry to interrupt, Kaha here.
Hey.
Earlier you mentioned the email, what they differentiated between official notification, acceptable, official notification, and unacceptable.
Mhm.
Apologies if I missed it. Were you or is DOT engineers encouraged to respond to the contractor, letting him know that, or is it just unspoken? You showed that example email. I think that was an example one you created, right?
It was, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I
In that
think,
in that
yeah,
email, I saw the thread, but is it a best practice that you guys what are we encouraging the engineers to do? Respond to let them know that if this is in fact a delay claim, to make sure you respond as required by 108 whatever, or do we leave it unsaid and wait for a later time?
no, I think that's a good question and a good point. I would say definitely a good idea to let them know that they need to put that into an official letter if they do truly
Yeah.
feel there's a delay. Yeah. So,
I don't only say that because officially you might be right, but then sometimes I've seen, well, this was many years ago, right? They look at what was the government's response? Did
mhm.
we let the contractor know that, or did we ask about it, right? Or did we initiate conversation? Um, and it seems like it'd be a better practice to clarify at that point in time, right? So that you
Right.
can start the delay tracking process or not. Okay. Okay. I
Yeah,
got you.
no, for sure. That's good points. I would say, yeah, definitely we need to tighten that up and let the contractors know. It's if you guys feel
Yeah.
like we're delaying you, give us the official letter, show us on the
Yeah.
schedule how it's delaying, give us the information so that we can best manage the
Yeah.
time.
It seems like it's incumbent upon the government, at least in the few cases I've reviewed back in the day, that they are looking for our response and that it is our responsibility to, if we see that kind of thing, to respond in the way you just said, right? Hey, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you're notifying us of officially notifying us of delay. If so, be aware of this, and also be aware of this and the required information, which you just shared. Um, the other question I had, first comment is I'm really looking forward to, Kai, you mentioned possibly doing a training on that. That's something I've tracked for a long time with DOT. Randall, which was great. You pointed out the different approach when it's calendar day versus working day. As whoever's been around long enough to hear me gripe, I've never been a big fan of working day. It has been really popular here, at least for the first few years I came down. And then the working day rain day tracking, it was my understanding that it was through the statement of work, right? So if during a work week, no work day, there were rain days when the contractor, correct me if I'm wrong, when the contractor signs that paper and then DOT signs off on it, which wasn't always timely at one point in time, but from what I can tell now they do it close to weekly. Is that DOT's acknowledgement of those uncompensable, non-compensable time only extension? Is that where the agreement is made that it's a rain day and no cost? Is it through signature of the statement of work, or is there another step?
I think that's the
If you're
process
asking,
now.
yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Randall.
Okay.
No, yeah, no, that was it. I think, yeah, that's how it's tracked. I think they
Yeah.
agree out in the field, obviously, and then that's get reflected on the weekly statement of working days.
Okay. And that gets added up. And then
Yeah,
calendar days, obviously, Randall, I agree with you completely. Actually, before moving home for the 15 years I was up there, that's all we mostly dealt with. So working day contracts and that statement of work was really new to me. As you well know, Randall, we talked
yeah.
about that a decade ago. Um, okay. So yeah, no, if you guys get around to that, that would be a good thing to try. Are we doing calendar days again? There was a time when I did a pool over 3 years, I checked over a 5 year period, and we were at like 2 out of 10, one out of 10 projects were calendar days, and then 1 year I think was 2 out of 10. Are we still heavy in the working day side of things that the field is experienced? Sorry, a little bit of side note, Joel.
No worries.
For
Um,
Kauai, yeah.
Why don't, I
okay.
was gonna
No,
say,
I'm just
can we
wondering as we
respond in
jump
the
through the
chat?
yeah. Oh, okay, yeah, perfect. No, I'll move on from that. As we do this training, I kind of, for me, it's a little bit different eye as to how you're tracking the schedule, and then now we're jumping into OCC. So thanks for answering my questions. I was holding them off, and I appreciate you answering them. And jump back into this
Yeah, no
ACC
worries.
stuff.
I will add, you just made me think of one more thing, Kaha, which is, we need to also really take a look, because what happens sometimes is we get rain days in a delay period. So if we're not tracking those correctly, it could end up being kind of a double dip of a day. So that's another thing that we need to look at when we're looking at the schedule, because all those rain days should be added into your schedule, right? And then that way you would be able to see that, oh, this rain day is actually happening in this delay period that they're claiming. We're not going to give them 2 days for one day, right? So we
Yeah.
would have to adjust that in the. I should have added that into this just to show an example of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, I think it visually shows up in your schedule, right? I think, right, if there's a rain days,
Yes,
say they went a week, it would show on the update,
if
eventual
they're
update,
doing it
the
correctly.
push. No, that's what I'm saying. In an ideal, if they were managing it well, if they were an A+ contractor in terms of progress schedules, it would show, right?
Right.
Over the
Yes.
every
Yes.
update would show if there was 5 days or 10 days, it would okay.
Yep. Agreed.
Versus calendar contracts, you wouldn't, right? It wouldn't show
Y-
the push of
Yeah, I
never
think
mind.
as
I'll
long as
listen.
as long as the rain day is at least notated on the schedule and we can see where it falls when you kind of compare it against delays, I think that would be sufficient.
I got a question.
Um,
What about
yeah.
Appreciate
rain
it.
days during a period where they don't have any scheduled work? Because I've seen that where contractors try and claim rain days, but they didn't have anything scheduled. And then they're trying to go back. Well, if we really wanted to, we couldn't have worked on that day because it was raining anyway, But
Right. So basically, yeah, that's an interesting question. You're talking about if there's a calendar day contract, but they're only working 5 days a week, and then like on the weekend there's a rain day.
yeah,
Does
or
that
even on
count?
a working day contract where,
They
they
just
just
didn't
don't
have
have
work
any
planned.
scheduled work, right? But then it rained maybe 3 days, and then they're trying to come back later on saying, hey, you didn't give us time for these days that we didn't have any scheduled work, but it rained. Even if we had a scheduled work, we wouldn't have been able to, so stuff like that.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I would think, I would think there might be a case there for, I couldn't work even though I didn't have anything scheduled, but I don't know. I'm just kind of devil's advocate on that. It would probably have to be situational,
Yeah,
taking
I
a
don't know
look
if
at
I
it.
anybody
know
else ran into that.
I know we ran into it when there was what was it? We had two different work going on, and the critical path was a bridge, but they also had paving, but it wasn't critical path. So they couldn't pave because it was raining, but they could do their structural work, but they were delayed because of materials or something. So we ended up writing in the weekly statement that if due to these delays, like we would track the delay and see how it affected the critical path. But yeah, in that case, I would not grant time. But they should be incorporating that and show how it affected their critical path. So from a situational standpoint, I think it depends on why they weren't working. So if they had maybe it's material and it's going through the critical path, does the rain day affect material procurement? So did the rain day affect the critical path? So I think that would be the key to it.
Yeah,
Are
like
they
I'm
working because they're busy elsewhere? Well, then your critical path is you need to start, maybe the critical path at that point is your pre-construction submittals and you haven't done them because you're busy. So we're still, in this critical path.
yeah, one that comes up is like asphalt plant breaks down, right? It's down for 2 weeks, but there's also, let's say, 8 days of rain during that period.
Mm-hmm.
What, like that's kind of that muddy area where
Yeah,
it's like, well, you wouldn't have been
it would
able to
be
work because your
good.
plant is down, but
Right, right.
it
But if
did
if
rain
the plant
for,
weren't down, so
yeah,
that might be, and I think those would be great for everybody on the call. If you have those scenarios, bringing it to the construction engineers to bring to Highway C, so we can look at those cases and maybe, we do have an interpretation part of the wiki site, and we can start putting those examples there because every situation might be a little bit different. In that case, part of me would want to, the plant is kind of their responsibility. Rain is kind of ours. So maybe it would be a concurrent delay that wouldn't allow for compensable overhead, but would give them extra time. So
Yeah, those are stuff
yeah,
that, yeah, it's not super straightforward, and I just wanted to bring
right.
that up because it's
Yeah.
something that happens quite often, I think.
One of the things
And
you
that,
said, Kai.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. No,
yeah.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say those would be great examples to build the library of interpretations, just to give people like, here's where we did it on Quai. That's always been the vision of the wiki site / interpretation section of it, so
Huge.
that people can go look and see what other people have done and kind of, obviously every district is going to have your construction engineer or DE that'll make those final determinations. Because maybe there are other things happening on the contract, so maybe that's where you negotiate some of that. So that's where I think every situation might be specific. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Kaha.
no, one of the things, and I really like this part of the conversation because where I sit, you see different things. You see different delays. You see levels, engineers, DOT engineers with varying levels of exposure, therefore experience. And you mentioned it varies from situation to situation. So one of the things I keyed in that you said, Kai, is since it varies from situation, you track it and you figure it out later. That's one of the things I think I would say seems to be the most helpful for the engineers that may not exactly know if it's a real delay or not, but they track it well enough, they can seek the advice of their supervisor or maybe even Highway C, right, to take it apart. As long as what I've seen is as long as you have the data, so your inspector is out there tracking everything. You might have had a disagreement in a statement of working days. Say something happened during a 3 week period. In week 4, when it all settles, if you got the right documentation of what transpired, you could always sit down. And my experience with contracts is you always can, figure it out, have that conversation and award time and compensation or not compensation accordingly. That can all happen if we have our documents. And then in the few times where I've seen it not be able to happen is because we don't have clear enough tracking of what exactly happened. So I guess what I'm saying is from the chair I sit in, one of the things I'd encourage, which is what you said, track it all. And at the right point in time, sometime after, without too much delay, figure it out. That's what
Right.
that's what
And
I think is the best way to approach these things if you're uncertain about it.
which is why I like, the fact that Joel's saying track the delays, notify delays, because at a worst case scenario, you
Exactly.
have letters with all the notifications. Ideally, you're responding to those notifications. Worst case, on a monthly basis, you're responding in the monthly schedule updates. So it's just important to stay on that because yes, you can recreate things as long as you have the paper
The
trail.
data.
But if you don't have the paper trail, that's when it just becomes
Yeah.
horrendous.
And those notifications Joe mentioned in the contracts, they're there because correct me if I'm wrong, the engineer, once notified, supposed to heighten, right? The tracking and documentation. Maybe if you were tracking it a certain amount, right? You even get more specific about what's happening on the job and where and what time. At least that's been my experience, right? Whenever we get faced with a delay notification, everybody's on the team is put on notice to track, to take a closer look at the work happening and make sure we document. So again, I appreciate that part of it. And then these are monthly. We're still at monthly. Any projects doing biweekly? That's when these updates, Joe, that you're about to jump into and ACC come in, right? Is it monthly still or biweekly for some?
I think the spec requires it. It says
Biweekly until,
biweekly or monthly, I believe, but yeah.
yeah.
It's
Okay.
bi-weekly unless approved in
Until,
writing. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Unless
You're supposed to
and then that's where,
request
yeah,
in
go ahead.
writing. Yeah.
I
So
think
the things we
normal
just talked
practice is
about, Kai,
monthly.
yeah,
Mhm.
everybody jumps to monthly. I know in conflict with DOT jobs, they would stick to those 2 weeks, right? If there was controversy, and that's the reason it was written that way.
Mhm.
But that's when
Mhm.
you would, I guess where I'm going with that, Kai, is that's where you would, or Joel, is where that's where you would settle up, right? You come when on these updates, what you're showing is the automated version of what you're showing. You compare against your notes that you've
Yeah,
tracked,
I mean
the team
that
notes,
that's
right? To
correct. Yeah,
see if they
because
see it correctly. And if they see something, if they show it one way, but you see it different, you highlight it right in
and
the
that's where you
notes,
should be
which
making comments. It should be coming through as a
100%.
submittal that would give you a chance to comment on it. And yeah,
Yeah. Anyway, okay, sorry, but I'm really excited about how you comment. It makes it so much easier with these tools you've shown last time and you're jumping back into to really just highlight some of these things we're talking about. Actually, we never had these tools when I was sitting in the field chairs.
Yeah, for sure. This particular one, I kind of stumbled into it, realizing that it's actually kind of helpful. But I will show you guys. So basically, what I'm doing here is I'm gonna compare my very last version of this schedule, which is the as-built at the end, to the very first one. So I just want to see what happened on this project. Where were there deltas? So that's what I have up on the screen here. And note, it's they have all these pre-made filters here, and this is showing me all of the changes that happened on the project. So, there's 143 items. So basically, things are going to happen, dates are going to move from what you had planned to what you actually did. This is kind of a little bit too much info, but if I do click over to this critical path filter, so this is just going to show me what happened on the critical path for the project. And this would be how I could help determine where the delays were and what pushed out and all of that. Um, so I think the coolest feature here is if you actually peel this back one layer here, you can see duration. So this is what I wanted to take a look at. This is how I'm going to find my concurrent delays. I'm in comparing the two schedules. So, looking through this, you'll see anytime you see like these little arrows, it's telling you, this date pushed beyond what this showed, right? So the black lettering here is the as-built schedule, so the final, and then the pink is the first schedule. So yeah, so looking through this, basically, I would kind of look at it from you'll see all these carrots, and these are kind of more like the bigger buckets of activities. I'm kind of just trying to find these actual activities and to see where there were differences. Um, so it looks like, you kind of roll through this thing, and I would sort of make note of all of these delays where we had some shifts. So in this case, looks like cold planing was supposed to be 2 days, but the contractor took 6 days. So that's a delay. This is filtered on my critical path. So in other words, this tells me the contractor cost us 4 days right here. I'm not exactly sure, how that lined up with my delay periods that I've already seen, but you're going to kind of go through these. Like this guardrail looks like was supposed to go in. It took 21 days instead of 20 days. So I'm just kind of going through this and making comments where I see a duration bust. So looks like the signage was an extra 4 days. There's an extra day here. And then you'll see this too, which is if you see this green arrow, that means you actually save time. So it looks like procurement of our long lead materials, we actually saved some time. The contractor did. So I would usually take note of both just to see, where that's how you're going to kind of see what happened to the schedule in the end. But looking at this, that looks like the punch list was, as we know, it was 34 days to get through. They had 9 on their schedule. And then in this PCC, this was the kind of my critical path area. I know there were some busts in here. So it looks like blanket grinding was supposed to be 5 days. It took 10. Compaction, testing of subgrade was supposed to be 2 days. It took 9. Base course placement, 5. It took 10. So I would just kind of go through this list here and kind of make my chart on the side. And now I'll just jump back into the PowerPoint because I think I can best explain it from this point of view. But sorry, one sec. So what I do is I take I'm using this as kind of like just to best explain it, but I draw it out and try to show me like what happened on the project. In this case, I kind of used, I did some color coding on these activities just to show you what all this is. But the contract work, this is just where contract work was completed, is all the green. And then the red is where we know there were H-dot delays per our TIA. And then I added in the rainouts just to show those periods of time, because we know we're going to have to give time for that. And then the closeout, I just made blue just so we know. And this is how I denote it with my two those two milestones, right? On the bookends, I can see, okay, the pre-final was here, so this becomes my closeout period to the substantial completion date. Now what I do is I'm going to drop in all of my concurrent delays that I found in ACC when I was looking through, and I just wanted to see, hey, where were the contractor delays in my critical path? So I sort of ended up plotting those in and just found out that, hey, look, there was a concurrent delay here on, within our known delay period. So this is where basically what this says is both HDOT and the contractor were driving delay. While, when they submitted to us, it just said, hey, you guys are on the hook for the delay period. But when we looked at the schedule, we found out, you know what, you guys were delaying it for part of that, right? So out of that 14 days, they were on the hook for 7 days. And so when we just look through all of this and just see where everything landed. I see there were two separate delays in this delay period that we were going to grant them. So that's how I found my concurrent delays. And then, just to go further, I see, okay, there were also, here's the, that grinding delay is right here in our contract work. So there was no known delay there, but that helps explain why we were so over on time, was that we had these delays that the contractor had on there, but they didn't really notate it, in their letter, right? Because they're also supposed to, when they submit these notifications, let us know when there's concurrent delays, or show it on the schedule. But of course they're gonna try to keep that stuff hidden, because it would be more money for them if they just got the full time. So just wanted to show how those concurrent delays kind of lined up. Then what I would do is I would just go through delay by delay and do my analysis of those sections. So for this delay period 1, we had 14 calendar days compensable is what they were claiming. In my TIA analysis, I said, okay, out of those 14 days, there was a concurrent delay of 7 days. So in the end, I would say HDOT would own 7 calendar days compensable and 7 days non-compensable due to that concurrent delay. So we would still give them the 14-day period of time, because a concurrent delay, we give time but no compensation. So we're giving that time, but we're not paying overhead for 14 days. We're paying overhead for 7. That's what the TIA shows. And then I would just go through each of these delay periods and do more or less the same. The delay period 2, we had 34 calendar days that they were claiming compensable. When we looked through it, we found that there were 9 days of concurrent delay. So we ended up with 25 calendar days compensable and 9 calendar days non-compensable. For that delay 3 with the rainouts, we ended up, like we talked about before, per HSS 10805B3 little b, no compensation is allowed for weather-related delays. It's in the spec. We're tracking that on the WSWDs. So in the end, we would just determine, okay, we're going to give 3 calendar days non-compensable. For delay period 4, that was the punch list delay. The contractor was claiming 19 calendar days compensable. After our TIA analysis, we said the contractor did not follow HSS 10805B, and we also disagreed that the punch list was anything being asked of them outside of contract. So in the end, we just denied merit on that, and we're saying there's no calendar days that we're giving them for this delay period. So when I kind of do my side-by-side analysis, this is kind of what we ended up with, which is the contractor was claiming 70, and they, by admission without notification, I guess, they were basically saying that they were on the hook for 18 days in LDs because they were claiming 70 and we were 88 days over. So that's the delta. After our analysis, we ended up going, okay, we're going to give 32 compensable calendar days, 19 non-compensable calendar days, and then 37 calendar days in LDs. Now I'm going to quickly walk through the rest of this. I know we're coming up on time, but liquidated damages, you know, as I mentioned early on, we need to kind of split these up into the different periods that to be able to figure out how much they get charged, right? So kind of looking at that first period, I found that there were 25 calendar days within the closeout that the contractor was causing the delay. So based on how that spec is written, we're doing 25 calendar days times 20% of, sorry, might have forgot to mention, but I was just calculating $5,000 per calendar day is my LDs for this project. So 20% of 5,000 is 1,000. So you end up with 25 calendar days times $1,000 per day equals 25,000 in LDs just for this closeout period. And then the remaining 12 days of LDs, it's kind of like, where were those at? Those would have fallen into what I showed you earlier, where they caused their own slippages on the schedule. So because this was during contract work and before the pre-final inspection, this would be them charged 12 calendar days at the full $5,000 per calendar day, and you end up with 60,000 in LDs there. We're getting close to the end of how this all lines up here, but so we're finalizing it. We're doing a time extension of 51 calendar days, 32 of which are compensable. So this is kind of like the financial side. And then we end up with $208,000 that we would give to the contractor. But then we also need to factor in those LDs. We ended up with 85,000 in LDs. So it's kind of like the final end all situation is we're giving them the 51 days. That's going to move our contractual completion date from February 25th to April 17th. And then our final cost with this change order would be $208,000 in overhead minus the 85,000 in LDs. And we end up paying 123,000 with that 51-day extension. So just a quick recap of this training. I know there was kind of a lot of info there, especially at the end, but hopefully you stuck with me. Just make sure your project is using those correct milestones. It's going to be really important for the dashboarding. ACC schedule module, I would suggest that you use it. There are some pretty good tools in there, particularly how I showed you to kind of compare analyze the critical path items, looking at those duration changes, analyzing the merit of delays using HSS. I mean, you know, there is a lot more in those spec sections, so I would highly encourage you, if you don't know, go read through those. There's kind of a lot more, and sounds like we will have a future training kind of looking harder at delay. And plotting the delays, kind of however it works for you to try to see where those concurrent delays fell, assessing the liquidated damages, and then finally the final time adjustment change order. So that is the end of my slides. I don't know if there were any other questions that may have come up in the chat here.
I don't see more in the chat. I did respond to some, so if you guys still have questions, either speak up or put it in the chat. We'll hang on for a little bit.
Joe, you know when you had that spreadsheet when you were showing how you computed your LD, I was just curious about what factors were you looking at in your spreadsheet? It was not easy to see like what you're looking at, like equipment, what work is going on during that day.
You're
Because when
talking
you
about
showed
the overhead, you mean, or that you're talking about the LDs?
well, you had a spreadsheet where you computed the amount per day.
It was this
That
one,
was
yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to see. So
Well, okay, so full disclosure, this was just kind of like garbly-gook, you could call it. We'll probably have to have another training to really get into how you would break down kind of the overhead cost. But it's going to be a mixture of things from, you know, like it's probably more, I would say, like upper management costs, factored in. You're going to have office rent factored in. There are things like escalation and other pieces to it that kind of go into all the metrics. So we'll have to kind of better answer that later, I think. For the purposes of
so
this, I was
Marvin,
just saying this was good and we're rolling with it.
yeah, so your question was about LD calculation, so this is not an LD calculation.
Yeah, this is overhead.
It's, yeah.
This would
Oh,
be
this is
that
an
time
overhead
related overhead.
calculation. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it's
Yeah.
time related overhead, whether it's home off. Right now, it's just it looks like project overhead, but yeah, we'll go into
Okay.
Yeah, I
another
I
should have
thought
made
that
training.
this
was
blurry
related
or
to
something.
the how you compute the earlier. I guess I mistook it for how you'd compute that LD per day for the project because once or several times some of the younger engineers would ask the field office to compute it for them. But we're saying, oh, normally it's figured out, excuse me, figured out and put into the contract. But the design side would work that number out because every project might have a different late completion LD depending on the project size and all that. So I thought it was related to how you would compute that because some of them didn't know. But like you said, I guess it takes a lot of data from upper management and
Well,
some
the
of the other
So
sections.
go ahead,
yeah.
Joe. I,
I was just gonna
I
say the LDs are always in the contract, so whatever that amount is
yeah,
on your special provisions, that's the number that we
yeah.
roll with. The calculation here is just based on the spec because the spec says we charge 20% of LDs if it's past that pre-final inspection milestone or you're in a punch list situation. We don't hit them with the full LD. We hit them with 20% of what's in your contract.
Yeah,
So
well,
to
Marvin,
for
I
the
think
late
you're
reduce
confusing the
completion,
two
LD,
different. They're two different things, right? Because you asked about the 6,500. That was a calculation that Joe, an example, like you said,
Mhm.
a gobbledygook calculation Joe showed that a contractor might ask for, and then the engineer needs to validate, right? That's different than the
Yes.
LD, like Joel said, that is specified in the contract. Those are unfortunately outdated, and you're right. There's a huge. Every state and government agency has a slightly different way of calculating it, but all are, in my opinion, behind the times, and error on the side of caution. So, I mean, not to overcharge a contractor in state settlements. Those are two different things, Marvin. Is that
yeah.
clear to you?
They're two completely
Well,
separate. Yeah.
I was just curious about like what the designer had asked for us to compute, whereas I didn't see it was for us to compute because I figure for every project, depending on the project size, like even
The
lane
designer
closure late.
calculates that, Marvin. The designer
Yes,
does calculate LDs,
that's what I
but
mentioned
they
to
don't
them. But
actually
then,
calculate it. It's actually like pre-designated. Because I work on the design side too, right? I don't know if there's any designers in here, but that's preset, and nobody ever questions it because states don't actually look at that to
yeah,
be a way of making money.
normally we just see what's given in a contract and follow that. But there were times in the PSNE, the designers would ask us for input on the LD for late opening of lanes or late completion of the project. So, I mean, every project
Oh yeah, that's
sometimes
different
would
too.
differ. They
Yeah.
would differ in amount depending on the size of the project, the length of the project, and complexity of the project. So I thought maybe I mistook it. I thought maybe Joel was going over some of the factors they look at to compute that. So I was just curious about that.
No, I'm
we
just in
can,
construction, kind of like looking at, hey, we got to give
yeah.
them, charge them 20% of that LD.
Okay.
And I know we're out of time, so if people have to jump off, feel free to jump off. If you have questions, stay and hang out, and we'll answer. We can go into that,
Mm,
but I would do it in conjunction with design. Andy, do you have a question?
No, I have a comment that there is
Okay.
guidance on calculating the LD, which depends on like how many inspectors or what is the damage to the government for each day of delay. That's why we asked the district how many people you would have on that would cost us that additional money. for each day of delay.
But how often, Andrew, do you see the contracts varying in the LDs? Meaning there's guidance, but it's like
Well,
windows, right?
it's hard to get that information from the district, so we end up saying, oh, what's a typical LD for contracts?
Yeah, you guys go by range, dollar amount, days. There's that spec, and I can tell you, I've dove in before with multiple states on the Fed side to see, and it never equates to what the actual compensation is that the state pays when they
So,
sit out there longer.
yeah, I don't
It's
have
a
that
small fraction.
knowledge for what is
Um,
typical.
yeah.
Um,
I wanted to point out a couple things because there's a couple good questions asked once the chat comes back up. One of the things, Joe, really thank you for what you shared there. Years ago, when I was still really elbow deep with you guys in change orders and calculating delays, this automation is far easier for a contractor to understand because I've sat with some of you, maybe not many of you here on this call, because it was a few years ago. Um, where we've calculated delay, and what you show here, Joe, is such a great tool. And the reason the tool matters is a lot of times contractors were a little bit skeptical of our printout or spreadsheet would always look different. So if this is how you guys are analyzing delay and capturing it and documenting it, what you showed, those steps, right, for each window, and then, it's like a support doc and you have a summary sheet. That is, I can see that being really reliable for really helpful to those conversations because a lot of times we had probably a similar summary sheet to what you had, but was all spreadsheets, right? And it looked like magic, but when you have that visual, to me, it's really hard to dispute. So, really, I really glad you guys are taking that approach in terms of analyzing, documenting, and then probably even eventually sharing the delay that you guys have calculated, how you calculate it. A lot of those tough conversations came in how we calculated it, and we didn't have the visual aids that you have now to really just highlight the overlap. And I remember having too many of those conversations, which leads me to my next question. Again, if an engineer is doing an analysis and they need help, are they able to reach out to Highway C and Kersey for maybe support on if they're doing it right or how to do it?
Actually, we have a meeting with Highway C. I know that's happened.
Okay.
And there is a meeting, well, we have a meeting today, so we can discuss that with Highway C. I know when we get those inquiries, we're usually chit-chatting with the construction committee. I see Eddie on, I'm not sure if I see Steve on. I don't know if you want to take that question, Highway CC, or we can talk about it. And I see Sue Lynn. I don't know if I see
and
Steve.
discuss.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about it, Highway CC. I think the opportunity really is to the construction committee, and raising those questions to the construction engineer for discussion.
I was just going to add, if anyone ever has a question that I could help with, just give me a call or shoot me an email. I'll do what I can to help. I don't want to misspeak, but open door for me. Awesome. Anything else? Anybody? We're a little over on time. Appreciate everyone jumping on, hearing me talk for a while. Thank you, Kai and Kaha and Randall and Marvin, Andrew, Eddie for all chiming in there too. Much appreciate everybody. I'm going to jump off now.
Okay. Thanks, guys.